During the final months of World War II, as Germany collapsed under bombings, starvation, and chaos, thousands of women found themselves swept into the brutal final stage of the conflict. Among them were female auxiliary personnel, Helferinnen, young women who had worked as clerks, radio operators, and assistants within the German military system. Many had never fired a weapon, yet when the front lines broke, they were treated as enemy combatants, marched across ruined landscapes, and held under conditions far harsher than most people today realize. But what happened next is a story almost nobody has heard. A moment when the war briefly stopped being about nations and uniforms and became about simple human hunger. By April 1945, one small group of German female POWs had been on the move for days. The rations had run out. Supply trucks never arrived. Commanders disappeared into the chaos. What remained was the simplest, most painful reality. They were starving. Some women collapsed during marches. Others drank ditch water. A few resorted to eating grass and raw beets taken from abandoned fields. Several POWs later testified that for an entire week, they had eaten nothing that could be called food. When American forces finally overtook their column, the women expected the worst. Many had been raised on Nazi propaganda that described Americans as brutal, lawless, and eager to mistreat prisoners, especially women.
So when U.S. soldiers approached, the German POWs braced for anger or punishment. Instead, something completely different happened. The American unit assigned to process them quickly realized the women weren't simply tired. They were on the edge of collapse. A military medic recorded that their faces were gaunt, hollow, and trembling. Several women could not stand without help. Their uniforms, once neatly pressed, hung loose from rapid weight loss. The medic later wrote, "These women were not enemy soldiers. They were starving human beings." The commanding officer made a decision that shocked the prisoners. He ordered that they be fed immediately. Not tomorrow, not after formal registration, but right now. A mess truck was called forward, and the Americans began preparing food on the spot. The German women stood silently, confused, expecting some trick. One U.S. corporal recalled, "They didn't believe the food was for them. They didn't move." Only when the soldiers insisted, physically handing them plates and guiding them toward the line, did the reality begin to sink in. Then, something unforgettable happened. As the first bowls of hot stew were served, several of the German POWs began to cry, quietly at first, then openly, uncontrollably. One collapsed to her knees before she even took a bite. Others tried to eat, but their hands shook so violently, the spoons rattled against the metal bowls. A few women turned away to hide their emotions, embarrassed by their tears. But the Americans didn't laugh. They didn't shout. They waited, offering gentle words none of the German prisoners expected to hear. "You're safe now. Take your time." One U.S. soldier later said, "I'd seen prisoners before, but never grown women break down because of a bowl of soup." A female POW named Liesel wrote years later, "We had been told the Americans were monsters, but monsters do not feed their enemies before feeding themselves." The Americans were also cautious. They knew starving people shouldn't eat too much at once, so they gave the women small portions at first: broth, potatoes, bread. After days of nothing, even this was overwhelming. Many POWs described the food as the best they had ever tasted in their lives. Once fed, the women were moved to a temporary holding camp. But the compassion didn't end there. American personnel provided clean water, simple medical checks, and blankets for those who were dangerously underweight. One officer ordered that they sleep indoors for their first night, saying, "No one sleeps outside in this condition." For the women, it wasn't simply the food that broke them emotionally. It was the realization that the enemy they had been taught to fear was treating them with a level of humanity they hadn't experienced even in the final months of their own collapsing country. Letters written years later revealed deeper reflections. "I cried not from hunger," one woman wrote, "but because my belief in what I had been told all my life began to fall apart." Another wrote, "We expected revenge. What we received was kindness. In interviews conducted decades after the war, some recalled this moment as the turning point in their understanding of the world beyond Nazi propaganda. Many later immigrated to the United States. One became a nurse, another married an American veteran. Their lives took paths none of them could have imagined on that day when they believed they might not live to see another sunrise. This episode mirrors countless similar encounters throughout 1945, moments when enemy soldiers, desperate civilians, and even ideological supporters of the Nazi regime discovered that Americans, despite the bitterness of war, rarely allowed hatred to overpower humanity. The U.S. Army's adherence to the Geneva Conventions, its emphasis on humanitarian treatment, and the individual decency of its soldiers created experiences that shocked many German POWs, especially the young women who had been shielded from fighting, but not from propaganda. And so, this forgotten story endures not because of military strategy or battlefield heroics, but because of something far simpler: a meal served to starving prisoners and the tears that followed. In a war defined by brutality, cruelty, and unimaginable suffering, this moment stands as a reminder that even in the darkest hours, compassion still mattered, and sometimes changed lives more deeply than force ever could.